All right, I should be recording now. So, again, welcome. We'll talk about how we're wrapping up Project 1. A week from today, you'll have your final deliverable due, okay? And that's reflected when you go back into the Canvas modules for the course. So you'll see that there's an assignment, and then there's also the page for today with some explanatory text. So if we go to the assignment, it just says, please upload your JPEG or PDF of your final composite drawing here. It's due by beginning of class next week, right? So you have some time, a whole week to do it. And if for some reason, in the spirit of failing faster, as I've mentioned before, right, sometimes you might get stuck. Email me, come to my office hours. I don't mind. If you can get rid of the, anyway. Anyway, so you can see that I'm trying to be as transparent as possible with you guys. So you know sort of what's coming up next, right? So you guys collected some assets, what we call like assets, right? Like sort of thinking about PNGs, JPEGs, AI files, right? Illustrator files maybe, or whatever. I can show you more of that. And in going through some of these workflows, I'll probably, again, go over a lot of the stuff I did last week, okay? But this time, I think you'll get a better sense of why you're doing this and how these could actually be composited together into, again, a larger composition. Because if you go to today's date, this page tries to describe exactly what we'll be doing step by step. All right? So I call this composite drawings. We've talked about how we're sort of focused primarily in Project 1 on getting you up and going with some geometry, with some grasshopper, parametric design, and taking that stuff and starting to collage it, montage it together in Photoshop. That's essentially what we're doing. We're almost to the end. Great. All right, so a composite drawing combines multiple different drawing styles, viewpoints, or types of information into a single composition to convey a complex idea, or basically the essence of your design and concept behind it. These drawings, often referred to as hybrid or composite graphics, layer various representations like perspective views, plan drawings, diagrams to create depth, and tell a richer story than a single type of drawing can achieve. So this is one way of thinking about this. How do you compose all these drawings together in some sort of, I guess, maybe graphic that's more than some of its parts? And I'll show you some examples right now. In fact, if you want to refer back to the examples I'm about to show you, the slides I have have been PDF'd and they're linked up here, okay? So let's just move over to this. There we are. All right, so again, composite drawings. And this is an example of the composite, or basically a collage. But this idea that you've already done our part, right? Now you do the fun part of taking these truss systems that you've made and turn them into something really pretty and lovely and beautiful. All right, so here's another example of what I'm trying to sort of convey here, these sort of composite drawings. This is one drawing, but you can see that there's actually, it's a composite of a lot of different sort of vantage points, projections, and views, right? So you can see I have a perspective up at the top left. That's actually cut and plan part of it. I have plan information, I have section information, elevation information, all sort of blended together overall into a really lovely composite, right? Again, composite being a sort of whole created from a number of parts, right? Yeah. So we have several drawing ingredients here. Instead of saying, well, here's my perspective, and then over here, here's my plan, and over here's my section, right? They're trying to convey something deeper, which is, I think, an overall experience. I think this is based off of being quarantined in London during the pandemic, where you have to sort of shelter in place for a couple of weeks, and sort of the limited footprint of the apartment and the building that he or she was in. You can see that, again, there's all the basic stuff is here, but look how it's all rendered close to the same, right? So that overall you start to see it in sort of one drawing emerge, right? So, for instance, the poche for things that are being cut, like walls, are actually the negative space, and that allows then every single surface, every single volume to be rendered and textured with tone and line work, right? So you start to see depth. Kind of a fun twist on, the idea that you usually add the poche to the stuff that's being cut, right? In this case, it's about having that contrast and reversing that. Here are some examples back when I used to teach hand drawing with students. So they would take these complex pieces of machine parts. You can see, for instance, these are just some practice drawings that they were doing before producing the final ones. And you can see that they had a part, you can see the top view, two side elevations, then again, all sort of radiating out from a single point. You start to see a section cut through this part, perspective, projection, branching out, and then an axonometric projection branching out in other directions. Sort of a parallel drawing. And again, here, this idea of taking these parts and pieces, showing the sort of serial section through them, and how they can be constructed. And then, again, thinking about that negative space. In this case, they added a lot of tone and texture, sort of thinking about that as a strategy. These things take a long time to do when they're like hand drawn, right? Especially when I insist on like treating each little piece like a piece of architecture. Everything has to be hard lined and measured and everything else. So, you know, these things have to be constructed with all these sort of, as you can see here, all of these sort of projections, right? How do you construct a drawing, right? You can see that I have an elevation, serial sort of sections showing different instances of coming through the part, projecting down to an axonometric that actually explodes out, right? And all of the sort of projection lines and construction lines in between showing how it was actually drawn, right? That's important. They're not the darkest thing. In fact, some of them are quite light. But this idea that the drawing actually shows the intention in the process itself is kind of an interesting thing that, again, we sort of gotten away from a lot of ways because, you know, we don't just sit down with like a parallel bar and a triangle and curves and things like that anymore, right? Thank God, that was such a pain. Would screw something up or you spilled your coffee on something and you have to start all over again. 3 more weeks of just doing the exact same thing. So anyway, but these ideas of like, you know, taking all of these lines, every line is intentional, it's there. And you start by really soft light lines and then you start to build up and darken certain things, right? So very carefully, this student started to select which lines to actually darken and thicken, right? Line weights. And then where to actually add shade and tone to describe 3 dimensions, sometimes surface and sometimes volume, right? Playing this sort of game that we can play. It's part of one of the tools in our tool belt. You know, when we craft drawings, because that's what we do as architects, we craft drawings. We make drawings. We don't make buildings, we make drawings of buildings, right? So creating visual emphasis, right? Directing the eye, moving the eye around the page, right? That's part of our craft. If we don't think about that, nobody else will. And so making these things legible in a particular sequence, I think is always important when it comes to drawings. Here's an example. I mean, these were all like second-year projects. Another second-year studio project. This is something similar to like, by the way, what we'll be doing in Revit later on here. But again, this student of mine, Pat, he's now working in the Bay Area, doing not architecture, but product design and industrial design. But again, this sort of compositing of information. So you have plan, site map, then hinged over to some sort of, what looks like a section drawing, but it's not really a hidden line drawing. It's more of a wireframe X-ray view, etc. So you can see that, you know, he's very much trying to sort of connect the sort of projections of these views with the grids that he was constructing, right? So these are model photos where he's pulling these things apart, photographing them and stitching them back together as a collage, and then projecting upwards with different drawings, right? All right, this is an example of my own work, right? So these are like collages that I make where, you know, I try to imply some sort of 3-dimensional depth and perspective, but they're not accurate at all, right? Like they're just collages. They're not meant to be completely photorealistic. But then I feed these into Midjourney and other Gen AI things to start generating all kinds of interesting derivatives of them, right? So then I can suddenly start to say, here's this what I'm thinking, and I can make a mood board of that and then feed it to AI and let Gen AI also sort of tease my imagination. It's like I have a creative team sort of working. I can have that working while I'm sleeping or eating dinner, right? And I can come back to things and say, well, that one's better. I like that, this one, right? Whatever, and start to again infuse the process with human intelligence. So you start to get these sort of really interesting sorts of things where you bring AI out of its comfort zone, right? Like it knows what a building looks like, and sometimes it regresses to the mean, right? It's to the average. Imagine taking every tract house picture it's seen from Zillow and averaging it out, right? Like, so what I try to do is when I use these sort of contemporary and sometimes brand new tools, is sort of try to bring them out of comfort zone, feed in my own work, feed in my own ideas, feed in my own graphics, and then it starts to learn and does some things that I think truly subvert that sort of average to the means. All right, so here's some examples. When I first started doing these lattice projects with students, I had a different set of requirements. But you can see that they're mainly trying to sort of come up with a poster or board. You could call this composite, but basically a lot of them took sort of close up of their system, like, and basically like bled it out of the frame, right? So that suddenly there's something right there, it's very dynamic, coming right out of the frame at us in the foreground. And then they would try to sort of organize a set of different views, even some line drawings, plan, section, axon, or breaking the system apart into individual trusses to show that these things off. Not unsimilar to some of the things that you guys were looking at, maybe in a different way, with maybe a few different requirements. And I show you this just to sort of, again, you're not doing exactly this or exactly the other thing or whatever, but to show you some examples, to get the gears in your head going, right? To think about, well, how do I begin to tell a story about my trust system? And how do I show it off in the most beautiful way possible? Part of that, I think, is also trying to discover the most dynamic sort of views, right? So, it's not lost on me that, unlike these in my sketchbook, you can actually generate perfect perspectives instantly, right? And move things around and just get it just right? So, but these are examples of sort of sketching, then turning things around, putting them in Photoshop, blurring things out, or putting the right background, then adding other sorts of information in that background. So you can't probably see this, but there's other sorts of drawings in the background, much looser, right? Process drawings. But they sort of recede to the back, right? Only when you get up close and start looking at it, you start to see things. Because we have that contrast between here's the subject, and in this case, I put a red background, right? So again, that contrast can actually help you. What am I doing each time? Trying to reinforce that one-point perspective. Here's that vanishing point right there, or here's this vanishing point right here, or here's the vanishing point right there, right? Start to see everything sort of splays out from that. Right. So here is me with my trust system, right? I just very quickly put some things together, right? Not too unlike what you guys were working on, right? You can see a lot of the ingredients are here. Very quickly, right? And I'm going to show you my workflows so you can start to understand the ins and outs of changing display modes, changing display colors, inverting, adding scale figures and other entourage if you want, etc. It's a little hard to see the white line work on the black background with the projection, but rest assured, these are just simply snapshots of the curves with the planes and connecting things up and drawing the outriggers, and then sort of drawing the bow and the webbing, cross webbing. So again, just a snapshot of how these things were constructed along the bottom. I have 3 different perspective views that are similar to each other. That I pulled out of Rhino with some quick soft shadows, white clay, Rhino rendering, in render display mode. Then I aligned them up since I actually made the ground plane black for whatever reason. Because I showed you guys the ground plane when you do render settings. You can actually change that. So again, I'll sort of refresh the memory of these things if you need to remember what happened or how I did some certain things. But what ended up happening was well, the white's going to be sky, black's going to be ground, so sort of Terra. If I just line them all up so that we have a consistent horizon, then I'm really sort of playing with bigger ground compositionally. Have a dark base and a nice white sort of blank top, right? So start playing with black and white, and then it's the game of what do I want as white lines on black backdrop, and what do I want as black lines on white backdrop. So So I have a sort of elevation or top view, I can't remember which one, elevation view of the thing, and as a sort of a line drawing, and then the sort of diagrams on the bottom, right? Then I started to scale figures, etc. Right? That's something you can easily do in Photoshop. All right, so again, the ingredients are you mostly have, or you know how to generate them. We'll go through some workflows right now, to refresh your memory of that. So, there'll be a little bit of overlap with what some of the stuff we did last week, right? But this could be like an example, right? I don't want you to copy this exactly or anything, certain, or maybe I say, well, maybe I like this better. I invert it in Photoshop, make the black lines white, put the white background black, move it down to the bottom, and then start to arrange, the diagrams in a different way. Kind of unresolved. I didn't really resolve much of anything there, but anyway, so again, just quickly showing you these slides are actually posted as a PDF on the page for today, right? Along with sort of that example. Let's talk about this example now, and then we'll go through some workflows. Right? So this week now, instead of just doing all the grasshopper stuff, we're taking that truss system, we're starting to generate graphics from it. You did part of that over the weekend, not knowing exactly where these were going. But it's good practice. And again, once you get good at it, it only takes a few seconds to generate any drawing you want. Right? All the information's there. It's just a matter of turning some settings on or off, turning to the right view that you want. Right? So it's good practice anyway. Right? You just need to get over that hump so it becomes like second nature. Within 10 seconds, I can generate a drawing from the model. All right. Anyway, I'd say look at this. We're going to look at composite drawings similar to what's above. You don't have to copy the example. In fact, I prefer if you don't. But definitely look at the ingredients that are up there, right? So, and again, these overlap with some of the things that we talked about last week and that you worked on this weekend. A minimum of 3 perspectives at eye level preferred, right? Why do I say eye level is preferred? What's an eye level perspective? Yeah, I mean, it makes you feel like you're standing right there, immersed in the scene itself, right? You experience what you modeled the way a human would if it was actually built, physically rather than just virtually, right? Because oftentimes, when people first start doing perspectives and you start to just move things around willy-nilly, you don't really think about this, but very few buildings are experienced by flying over them in a helicopter and looking down at them, right? I mean, I don't know what the roof of this building looks like. I'm sure it's ugly as sin, just like the rest of the building, but whatever. Okay, so, right? So eye level, right? And have you guys talked about constructing perspectives? Well, we'll look at this in Photoshop if you haven't, but identifying where the horizon line is, where the vanishing points are, and then where eye level is to establish how you populate the thing with scale figures, how you begin to sort of show scale accurately, accurately, I think is really important, right? So we'll talk about that when we start bringing some of these things in Photoshop. I'll start to move some guides around and start to draw on the screen so that we can, again, be very careful and deliberate about how we begin to populate our scenes, making sure that we're really showing scale accurately. All right, so we see minimum of 3 eye-level perspectives there, right? I tried my best to sort of bring myself down, so I'm about 5.5, 6 feet, somewhere between probably like 5'8", my eyeballs, right? Like 6 foot exactly, oddly enough. So again, I sort of drag that guide down, establish one, and then that eye level becomes the same for everybody else in the scene. And I just sort of scale where their feet would be, and that helps determine how far away or how close up they are, right? So again, we'll look at this when we're doing transforming layers in Photoshop anyway, and adjusting scale and things like that. But a series of diagrams showing how the truss geometry is constructed. I'll show you some workflows for that, but suffice to say, we can bake things out, get back into Rhino, but for some of this stuff, like it's all just construction geometry. What I can do is I can just turn certain widgets on or off in the preview in Grasshopper, and then that ugly, tacky red and green, I'm not a fan, sorry. But I'll show you how you can change the display properties for the preview for Grasshopper. So you can turn things to black and white and gray and those sorts of really great colors for mine work and things like that. A simplified plan or elevation drawing, I've shown that up there. Start with a canvas that's 18 by 18. And as long as you keep one of those dimensions, either height or length, as 18 inches, you can then sort of adjust as needed, right? You can see that mine isn't a perfect square. I started with 18 by 18, and then I sort of cropped down the top and the bottom, so that again, the longest dimension is still 18, but really the height is more like, I don't know, 12 to 14 inches. That was just based off of visual, me just goofing off, okay? All right, so again, you're gonna have some questions when you go back to this and say, okay, let's start this thing off, right? Josh isn't here to talk at me. What do I do? Read through this, right? All of the sort of rules and guides are here to sort of help you out. These are minimums. I sort of put this with a little note at the bottom with an asterisk. I'm giving you some creative license, and I want to really emphasize this. I'm giving you some creative license to explore, engage, and execute your own ideas. And to, again, help develop your own sort of aesthetic tastes, stance, voice, right? Sort of visual, graphic voice. And so, again, you can start with this as a sort of baseline, but you certainly don't have to copy that. Like, I don't want to expect to see, it'd be really boring if I saw 40, they're all the same, white top, black bottom, and then, like, you could go vertical. I mean, there's lots of different ways. There's no right way, per se, one right way to compose these things together, right? And so, again, I just want to sort of emphasize that, right? There's more than one way to compose these drawings together. Right? You don't have to just do mine. Maybe it's good, maybe it's whatever. Right? Where my ambiguity starts, that's where your imagination should sort of take over. Right? Your creativity should kick in. I want you to sort of, again, design is the frame for everything here, right? So even when I write something in Word, I'm thinking about how things are composed graphically. Right? Design is everywhere. Right? It's how you read things. It's how they are legible. And this is our craft. Drawings are definitely something that we should take very seriously. It's our craft of graphic visualizations. All right. The composite drawing is more or less the final deliverable for Project 1. We'll be ending Project 1. Yay! All right. And then moving on to Project 2. Let's see. So grading will be based on the following criteria. This is important to talk about as well. Okay. Just simply going back through and following the instructions, making sure you fulfill the minimum requirements, right? It's really simple. I've listed them out. I've shown you graphic examples, and I've listed them out in bullet points, so they're easy to read. Make sure you meet the minimum requirements, okay? Then we talked about, these sort of, we have something like 50 by 500 feet. That 500 feet of length is meant to, so you start to, when you get this sort of tunnel vision, one-point perspective from this thing, to sort of see all of that depth, right? So again, make sure that you're sort of framing this thing when you're taking these perspectives out. So not only am I at eye level, but I'm starting to see that this thing extends way off into the background and turns a corner and disappears, or you can start to, again, see that depth. Right? I want you to sort of see that. Situating the one-point perspective to show that length, right, that 500-foot length, eye-level consistency, accurate positioning of scale figures, which we'll talk about again, as I mentioned, in Photoshop. I'll show you some ways you can begin to establish eye level, and then you can start to populate things and size things correctly. There's nothing worse than when figures are off, and then it's like the only thing people can see. It sort of breaks the optical illusion that this could be an actual three-dimensional scene, right? When the scale of your human figures are off. All right. The third point: sound use of compositional principles, such as. You guys talk about the principles and elements of design at all? Hopefully, art class, design class, studio, 180 maybe. Hopefully, right? Things like balance, motion, symmetry or asymmetry, right? Those sorts of principles that I think can help you, again, reinforce the sort of overall composition of this thing, right? It helps you establish visual emphasis. Right? What do I see first? What do I see next? What do I see last? Have you guys seen that meme where it quite really works? Maybe I'll look this up really quickly, right? To sort of demonstrate what I mean by this. Let's go to images. Yeah, here we go. Hot damn. You'll read this first, and then you'll read this, and then this one, and you'll read that last, right? And by and large, yeah, right? Again, somebody who knows a lot about just simple composition, typeface, scale, and emphasis, right? Boom, right? That's the game we play. And I've done this for, trying to, for the images that get published in the newspaper or on Architizer, saying here's what's coming up in this, plot, empty plot in Manhattan or whatever. Or all the way down to making sure that all the precast details that we're doing has what do you call it, the moisture barrier in the right place. And so we're trying to sort of come up with a language for the languages. So that anybody, even if they're wearing boots in ankle-deep mud in a rainy construction site, can say, oh, okay, it goes on this side and not that side. Here's how we layer it together. Right? So these things matter, right? Sometimes it matters because you want people to understand what the concept is, right? You're trying to be persuasive to win a client, right? Or get them to sign off on something. Right? And sometimes it's a matter of, like down the line, will this thing start to rot and develop mold? And if so, then suddenly you're going to be found liable for, all these mistakes because your drawings are neat like that. They're contractual documents. There's something that you say, this is going to work, it's not going to fail, and I've stamped it. It's a big deal, right? For drawing something as simple as this. You'll read this first, and then you'll read this, and then later on. That's the game you want to play. That's what I mean by visual emphasis, right? There's lots of different ways to do it, but that's what I want you to think about. Where's my eye drawn to? Right? Where does it go first? How do I move it around? Where do I move it? Okay, and then finally craft, care, taking to a line, project drawings, making sure things are accurately aligned, there's no goofy mistakes. If there's any text at all, there's no typos. There's no pixelated images. And overall legibility of the drawings are good. And I still have some work to do with these diagrams. Their legibility, right? Being able to read all the line work in them, not so good right now. I need to maybe beef up the line weight a little bit if I'm thinking that these are going to be white lines on a black background. Because both projected and print, it's a little harder to read, right? And so making sure that you make these things really pop becomes the key. I'm providing some human scale figures that are in Adobe Illustrator format that you're allowed to use if you choose to. You can find your own, or if you have your own library, go for it. But I've given you a starter couple files and I recommend making your own library of these sorts of things, right? Every class, particularly your design studios, you're going to have to add people, add trees, add cars, add sky, add street furnishings like benches or street lights or whatever, right? Start textures like ground covers and things like that as you start to collage things up. Start by building up your library and keeping those things in one place so that you can always go back and say, man, remember that grass texture, or these these mounding blooming plants, or these trees that I used in this other project. I wonder where those are, because I really want to use them again in the next one. Right? So I recommend, again, sort of taking these things, making your own sort of file folder, getting in the habit, again, engendering good habits, get in the habit of keeping things in particular places so you always know where they are. Your final submission is due a week from today on the 10 a.m. at the beginning of studio, or beginning of class, at which time we'll begin project 2. All right? Over here, what I wrote came largely, is pretty derivative of an article on Architizer that the author of that article did a really great job of sort of summarizing what a composite or hybrid drawing is. And so I provided a link there in case you want to look at more examples or see some further elaboration of the idea. I recommend actually clicking that link. There's a lot of interesting things on that page when you start to drill down. And again, this is meant to, again, broaden your horizons, right? Yeah, I think you probably, hopefully, learned in the first couple of years of your formal design training how to cut like plans and sections and elevations and those sorts of things. What do you do with them? How do you begin to really, I think, push forward this idea of craft, intention, and communication with your representation of drawings? All right. Okay, so without any further ado, still recording. This will be uploaded to Canvas when I'm done. I'm going to go ahead and open up Rhino. While that's opening, I'm just going to go ahead and pull out my handy-dandy mouse. I wouldn't want to actually use my... If any of you try to use Photoshop or Rhino or Revit with your touchpad, it's a pain in the ass, isn't it? Like it's a royal pain in the rear. So I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. I'm going to plug in my own mouse here. Make sure you do get a good mouse. Mine's not even a good mouse. Mine's like the ancient magic mouse from Apple, but whatever. All right, you'll see that there's a couple of things different on here. I'm just going to change them back really quickly, and then I'll show you how you can change things like the background color and etc. Let me just change it back here, though. All right. And I'm just going to go to truss space. That's my truss file. So you can see here that I actually... Turn that off. Yikes. Let me just turn a few things back on. I've been playing around and messing with things. Always busy breaking things. Here we go. All right, so here's the stuff that I've baked from Grasshopper into Rhino, right? And you can see that I took basically those last two pipe widgets, right? I gave two different pipe widgets, one for the bottom and top chord, the bow, and then the sort of the string of the bow, right? And then another one for the cross webbing, because I wanted to make them, like I wanted the chords to be slightly larger and the webbing to be slightly smaller. So that's how I did that. But then I basically just baked these back out into Rhino so that they're here, a static version. If I wanted to change some of those parameters, I delete this old version away in Rhino. I'd open up Grasshopper, change the parameters I want, rebake another version back into Rhino. That can start to build off, right? Okay, so I found that maybe it's helpful to just sort of look at the example, right? So let me go ahead and get a couple of these perspectives, and I'll show you exactly what I did. Again, playing around with what's black or white, that's up to you. There's nothing saying that you have to play around with that. You could have just an all white. I mean, think about some of the examples you saw, right? We saw some examples where everything was on a black field, right? And we saw some examples where everything was on a white field, right? Or even a gray field, right? So again, just be consistent or be intentional with what you're doing. Don't let the tools push you. Make the tools work for you, right? Not the other way around, okay? So if you have any questions, I'm trying to record this, and so you can go back and see, like, what did he do to turn this black or gray or white, right? That's fine. It's there. If you can't find that, just again, shoot me another email and I can hopefully explain or send you the exact timestamp on YouTube where I show it or whatever. All right, so what you can see here is that I have a bunch of white trusses, some white line work on a black ground, and a transparent background. I know it's transparent background because I can place a drawing behind these and it shows up. It's not sort of covered up with white pixels, right? Okay, so let's go through this step by step. First of all, let's go ahead and render it out. Let's go to the render display mode. By default, it's going to turn everything to sort of that white plaster material, right? Anything that's a surface. So all of these poly surfaces, all of these basically these cylinders, the pipes that we made, those are going to be rendered. And another thing to mention really quickly, right? And I take it for granted sometimes. Maybe this is part of the reason a couple of people had some certain questions, right? I take it for granted, but I have like, let's see, layers with settings or properties, sun, materials, all as toggle buttons along the right-hand side here, right? So what you can do is that, you know, some of these are boxes that can float. You can drag them over to the right and dock them, right? So these can float, but if I drag them over to the right and dock them, right, then suddenly I can toggle through them, switch through them pretty quickly. And if there's one of these that you don't have, but you need, you can right-click, and then you can turn on or off the right check boxes. So I am going to make sure that my rendering settings are part of that right-hand side that I can toggle on back and forth, right? And this is just an old, I mean, I know this because I've been doing this for over 25 years, but you know, having that sort of teapot or sphere or whatever it is that's rendered with this sort of blue shader, that's like a red flag to me. Like, oh, okay, that's where the render stuff is, right? Whether it was Form Z, Studio Max, RenderMan, Maya, Studio Tools, going all the way back to late 90s and how they animated dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, right? Like those, I just understand that, right? But if you always look for that blue shader, right? That blue, whatever that blue rendered object is, in this case a sphere, that's going to be your render. And if I hold my cursor over this, you can see that I can either bring up the render tools or I can right-click and turn on the render settings, right? So basically it's this blue thing over here with a hand on it. That's the settings. You can see that it also starts to adjust some of the settings that I'm seeing here in render viewport mode. One of those settings happens to be whether or not I want it to automatically generate a ground plane for me when I have it in rendered mode. A plane that extends infinitely from that 0, 0, 0 on the XY plane. And so right now I have it off, but if I turn it on, then yeah, you can see, suddenly this thing is casting some shadows on a plane here. They're soft shadows, they're not ray trace shadows, mainly because I don't have the sun turned on, but I could do that. If I turn the sun on, that's a whole other sort of can of worms. Then I can tell it exactly where I am. It looks at the latitude. I can tell it exactly the time of year, time of day. It's going to position that sun precisely where it should be, and it start to project shadows. I'm just going to turn that off. I'm not so concerned about sun light at the moment, right? I just like these sort of soft shadows, this white clay render, right? And I'm just going to sort of flip through and try to find some good perspectives. And I'm, again, going to try to keep in mind that, just zoom in here a little bit. If my scroll wheel isn't working on my mouse too well, like it's not granular enough, and I keep scrolling way too far and way out too far, I can always go to this magnifying glass with the plus minus on it and just click and move slightly and just sort of position myself. And I can pan and then tilt, and pan and tilt until I get something just right. One of the things I've noticed right off the bat was that I'm really sort of generating more of a vertical sort of, I mean, these all are sort of taller than they are wide, right? And so maybe I start to adjust my viewport accordingly. And I just want to make sure that I also get everything in the screen, so I'm just going to do that. Let's say, boy, wow, I love that right there. That's great. Okay. And another important thing to think about is once you have the perfect perspective set up, right? Think about a perspective, right? First of all, let's talk about this just for a moment. We'll talk more about this when we look at twin motion. But think about all the stuff happening in the background here, right? So first of all, we have the geometry. And we are assuming that our position is a camera, and that the camera has certain properties, like lens length and focal angle, right? And also how close it can see and how far it can see, sort of clipping bounds near and far, hither and yon, right? And likewise, the only reason we see these things is because we have hypothetical light sources striking them, and some of that light bounces back towards the camera, right? Like, we see that red wall because light hits the wall, and when it does, red portions of the light spectrum hit our retinas, and we say, oh, look, it's a red wall, and it comes this way, and it pushes back, and it moves that way. There's a door there, and there's those ugly red exit signs, etc., right? Yeah, that's how we see. When we turn the lights out, we can't see anything because there's no light hitting our photo sensors, i.e. our eyes. Cameras work the same way, right? So, if I think about this, right, let's say I work really hard to establish just the perfect shot, right? And then, I do it, I pull this perspective out, I go home, I close Rhino, I turn off Windows, I restart my machine, I eat dinner, I take a shower, 3 weeks elapse, and I'm like, oh shit, I need to get that perspective. I didn't have something turned on, or I need to add something else. Are you gonna sit there and screw around trying to find that perfect perspective? No, you can save these things, right? You can save the camera, the properties, right? Its position, where it's pointed, its focal length, etc. And so that's why this named views, this camera, comes in really handy. If you see that here on the right, I recommend keeping it there. You can always make a new named view, and you can call this perspective 10 or whatever it is. Now it's suddenly there. Now if I accidentally screw something up, right, I can just double click on that and boom, I'm right back there. I can come back. So once you establish some of these things, always save those views, right? And in fact, all of these saved views, if you look, when I right click on the viewport label, right, and it says set view, and you have top, bottom, left, right, all this sort of generic stuff. Look at this, it also has all of the named views I've saved, right? So I can set any of these viewports to any of these things that I've saved in the past, right? So I can start to toggle through and say, I like that one. This one's all right. I kind of like the depth back here. How you can see it sort of flex in, flex out, and then flex in again. This one's a nice one if I need a close up. This one needs to be longer, but it's basically the whole thing if I can sort of resize the frame again. There we go. Anytime now. Come on now, Windows. There we are. And so, yeah. Let's see. There. I don't know why it took so long. All right. So I go to those render settings. I can turn things on like, do I want a ground plane, etc. Right? And then again, down here, I can also add that named views. Right? If you don't see it on yours, you can right-click here, say, okay, toggle it on. I want named views to show up there, so I can go through and scroll through layers, named views, my render settings, my materials, etc. Before, or at least for my example, and last week I showed you guys how you can take that ground plane, you can start to change its properties as well, right? It's automatically generating the ground plane. I didn't draw a plane or surface thing. It's automatically generated it for me, right? So if I go to the render settings and where I can toggle on the ground plane, I can also see more settings, and I can also say show shadows only or use a specific material, right? If I say use a specific material, then it's going to say, okay, I'm just going to use the default material. If I want to create a new one, I can click in this drill down and hit plus, and now I can go and create a new material. In this case, I would just keep it simple. I'm just going to go with a flat plaster material again. Okay. All right. Now, here's the new material I've made, and you can see by default it's sort of white or gray or something, right? So I'm going to go to the materials, the shaders menu, look at that new material, drill down inside of it, and start changing some of its properties, right? So I can change its color, I can change its transparency, its reflectancy, how glossy it is or isn't, etc. I can start to put bump maps on it, diffuse maps, displacement maps, etc. So how do you do that? Again, I always come back to this right-hand side. See this paint tube? Oh, yeah, that's materials list. And so again, I can just sort of toggle that on the right-hand side. You can see, oh, okay. You can see that I've also made, previously I made a plaster that was black. Let me go ahead and change this. And I'm going to say, okay, let's do color picker. Let's change that to that, right? Okay. I changed the properties of the material. The material was already assigned to the ground plane, so the ground plane automatically changes as soon as I start to make changes to that material, right? Okay. Now, one thing you might notice is that all my black lines are disappeared. It's because they just sort of blend in, camouflage into a black background, right? Black lines on a black background, you don't see them, right? So now I need to do something to change those lines. I can just go to the properties that they're, the layers that they're in, and their layers, the layer sort of colors were already assigned black, right? So I can just go ahead and change those to assign them as white, right? And now they show up against the black background. All right. Okay. So I'm going over a lot of weird stuff, and take a little tangent off here, talk about materials. Take a little tangent off here, talk about cameras or render settings, right? Again, this isn't even like hardcore rendering or anything. It's just like render mode, white clay, minimal stuff. It mostly looks like it does out of the box, just changing a few settings here or there, right? So what happens if, let's say, I wanted the reverse. I wanted a white background, a white ground plane and a black background, right? Okay, so we can do that. What I would do is I'd go back and change the ground plane to its default material. There we go. And I would go back and change these layers so that they show up to dark gray or black, whatever. Let's see, black will make them really pop, I think. Yeah, not too bad there. Yeah. So now how do I change that background? There's several ways you can do this, but if you go to the render settings, instead of saying, let's see, wallpaper, you could say use a solid color. Instead of white, I could again change it here. So I could say, let's turn it to black. There we go. Okay. So again, I'm just in my render settings. All right, so real quick, it's very simple once you start to understand where a few of these settings are, to then start to play with them, turn things on or off, flip them, right, and sort of see what kinds of results you get. Again, it doesn't take weeks to generate one drawing, like those pencil drawings, graphite drawings I showed you. It takes seconds, right? That affordance of speed then I think is incredibly helpful. Let's see. If I also go here, you can say like render curves, make sure you're showing certain curves and things like that. If you don't see certain lines and curves showing up, right, you can also look at those in the render settings as well. All right. But basically, I've done several things here already, kind of like a cooking show. I'll just show you what I pulled out the other day, and then I'll show you how I generated a few more of these things that I haven't shown yet. Let's see, project 3, no, project 1, here we go. Always retooling these things, so I have to figure out project 3 by, some point here. Right, so I got that one, I got that one, I got that one, just basically based off of the same things again. I'll show you how you can do these things here in a minute. Right. I'll show you how you can generate that drawing in a minute from Grasshopper. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little more then about showing things from Grasshopper, because that's important. That's how I generated line drawings with all of the little intricate lines and curves and the planes, right? It's also how I generated the diagrams where I turned certain widgets on and then turned more widgets on to sort of build up the model from a set of curves to curves populated with planes, to connecting the planes with lines, to building the outriggers, to drawing the arc, right? To then starting to divide everything up and then creating all the zigzags, right? So that sequence was something that I was just previewing in Grasshopper, changing the views in Grasshopper, and then pulling them out. So here, let's talk about that. I'm just going to change this back really quickly, at least for the time being. Let's see. So I'll turn this back to white for the moment. There we are. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back here and I'm just going to turn off all of my Rhino stuff because I'm going to open up Grasshopper and I just want to see the Grasshopper stuff for a moment. Go ahead and open that up. We'll open our graph back up here in a minute. It's stupid that this thing keeps popping up. There we go. Uncheck it and close it. Like I need a tutorial. Although the other day I could have used a tutorial. That was embarrassing. File, recent files, trusses along rails. There we are. Oh, yeah. Boom. All right. So, look what's happening. Do you see any red? Oh, no, I don't. But I think I still see some green when I select things. And so one of the things you can do in Grasshopper, I mean, by default it shows like the preview in red and you select the widget, and it highlights the geometry display. It's green, right? And sort of, so you can sort of see what you're selecting each time. That's a default you can change really quite easily. Display, pull down, and go to preview settings. This is usually red. I can change it to just about anything I want, and you'll see that it updates. Not that I really want to change it to bright magenta either, but you can see that it's there. Let me turn some more of these things on so you can actually see in real time. Let's see, preview, and interpolated curve preview, and we'll turn these on. Oh yeah, look at that. There we are. So I can go back to display, preview settings. Let's say I want to turn those to black or gray or whatever. There we are. Yeah, really simple, right? So if I want to show some of this process, all this construction geometry, things like that I built up in Grasshopper, I don't have to like go through and bake out every widget. I can do that. It's one way of doing it. But I can just simply start to change how Grasshopper displays this stuff until it displays it the way I want it to. And then I can just simply take a raster graphic out and work on it in Photoshop. So here's an example of, sort of playing around with this. And let's see, let me get a better, sometimes it's hard to sort of see everything at once when I'm projecting here. Just going to make this bigger and start to bow outwards a little bit. Maybe I'll distort this quite a bit just so I can start to see things a little better. Yeah, there we go. Now I'm starting to see that sort of gradient of going serially sort of up and down along with the curve, left and right. So once I have something that I really like, again, I can use that capture to file. When it comes to line drawings like this, where I just have a lot of, lines and curves, what I'm going to do, watch, I'm going to go ahead and do the view and capture to file, just like I do with, in render mode. I'm going to make sure the transparent background's turned on. Down here in scale, I can basically increase the number of pixels, right? So the resolution of this thing. Right now it's telling me that if I export this out, I'm going to get 1440 by 661. Which is basically just the display port size right now, just how I stretch these pure accidents. Let's say I want something else I want more information to work with. I can double the scale, and now you can see that the resolution turned from 1440 to 2880, 661 to 1322, basically doubled this way and doubled that way, right? Now remember, you start to increase that number, you're squaring, you're doubling, or increasing both the width and the height. So 3 would be 3 this way, 3 this way, 3 by 3 is 9. So it sort of exponentially grows the amount of information it has to produce. So just keep that in mind. But when I do scale of 2 and hit OK, and then save this as a PNG, let's call this front view for a minute. It might take it actually a minute because it has to recompute everything and add 4 times as many pixels. It'll tell you right here, okay, image is finally successfully saved. Okay. So that's how I did that. And then, of course, I can go through here and pick the perfect sort of, first of all, I'm going to readjust these. That looks pretty awful. Let's see. I'm going to adjust that down, but I'm also going to put this more towards the center. And one of the things I can do is turn some of these things on and off in sequence, right? So maybe I start to turn this off. I can select all of these. What I'm doing is I'm right-clicking on each widget, right? And the menu that pops up, I can turn the preview off. It's still calculating all that stuff. It's just not showing you on Rhino. If I need to do that for lots of things, I can just select them all, see how they turn green, and I go to Solution and say Preview selected off and just do them all at once. It's a little easier that way than having to right-click and select everything. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so maybe I'm trying to show how these things work. I don't know if this is a great orientation. Here's what I might do. I might think in terms, instead of perspective, and maybe in terms of isometric, right? You guys remember paraline drawings? Yeah, so maybe I do that. Set view, isometric from the northeast. Yeah, sure, why not? Let's do the northeast. There it is, right? Now I'm going to make sure that I don't move my screen at all. Like once I start to take a diagram in this orientation, I'm going to turn things on or off and never move it so that everything looks like I'm just turning things on or off, but I'm still looking at the exact same view. Right? That's really important. Like I don't know why some people don't get that, but please do. Please remember that. Okay, so anyway, now I can do the exact same thing. If I wanted this to be black or gray, again, I can go to display, preview settings, and start to change things. I can just drag certain colors over or whatever, and let's make that a little darker. There we go. Boom. All right. View, capture to file, generate some PNGs. You'll see that actually these planes still have a little bit of green and red for their X and Y axes for all these little planes populating those curves. We'll take care of that later in Photoshop. We can just desaturate things and quickly take care of it. I'm going to hit OK, and I'll call this Axon 01. Then maybe I'll turn a few things on, like here are my lines, and here's my little outrigger that sort of comes out. Just crank that up a little bit so we can see it. Yeah, there we go. And go ahead and place that in. Go ahead and capture that. Right, again, just simply showing like, hey, there's a sequence to building the geometry behind this thing. I'll call this Axon 02. You know, just give it some names so I know exactly what it is and what sequence it comes. Here's my bow. Oh yeah, look at that. And maybe do that one. Let's see, capture to file, name it pretty predictably Axon 03, and then I'll have a fourth one. Let's see. And maybe for the fourth one, I don't know, these planes, maybe they could be turned off now so I can more accurately see some of these other things. Let's see. Select, solution, preview selected on. Oh yeah, isn't that great? Okay, make sure I unselect them and so that they're black, and then, right? So you could bring these lines, you could sort of, again, bake all these things out on different layers and take them into Illustrator and start adjusting line weights, things like that there. If this is a really big, elaborate drawing where you have lots of lines and you really need to do that, you can, right? It's going to take a while, but you can do it. But when I'm just simply doing a lot of line work and it's all going to be composited and I have grids of different drawings, right? Usually this will work just fine. I can always actually go and do a couple of other things. Maybe I'll show you in Project 2 when we're doing our diagrams. But for right now, this will work just fine. Axon 04, there we are. Oh yeah, so we have those. So now I'm bringing out these drawings from Rhino into PNG format. I'm just going to go ahead and open up Photoshop, which is right here. Okay. So let me just open this up, and we'll sort of turn the layers on and off, and then we'll start to build this up again from scratch. Let me just turn up my brightness here a little bit. Okay. So you can see I actually have a hue and saturation adjustment layer here. That sort of, again, I've taken the saturation, basically the amount of color, and turned it all the way down so there's no color, so it throws grayscale. And I've applied that at the very top. All the layers underneath it now are going to be desaturated. And of course, I can always go ahead and change that and increase it up, only because I still had a couple of little greens and reds in these drawings down here. It drove me crazy, like absolutely crazy. All right, so, but you can see I can turn that off. I can turn these off. These are all just separate layers that I brought in, copied and pasted from their own PNGs. I have people, right, that I've put in here. Turn these off. What's this? I'm not even sure what that is. Here we go. Here's one of the perspectives, and another perspective, and another perspective. Here's that drawing at the top. Here's the white field that's behind it, and then here's the black field that's at the bottom. So basically I start with 18 by 18 blank canvas. And I start to open up certain assets, copy and paste them in, compose them around, resize, start to make alignments. And I start to sort of say, what do I have? Do I need to move this down, up, to the left, to the right? Do I populate along vertically or horizontally with smaller drawings, etc., right? Nothing major, so let's try it. File, new, and I'm going to say 18 inches. You know, I've done this for a long time, and I still don't know what picas are. Points, I get millimeters, centimeters, inches, yeah, pixels, but picas, still don't know what the hell that means. Resolution 300, RGB color mode. That's really important because we'll be looking at these on a screen, not printing them out in a booklet. If you were thinking about print media, then you'd use CMYK color scheme. Background content, I'll just say transparent and hit OK. There we are. There's my 18 by 18, 300 DPI blank canvas. Next, I'll just come in here and start to identify what I want to use here. I'm going to clean up by name and then blow this up bigger. Clean up by name. Here we go. So the perspectives seem pretty important. I'll start with those. Here's a few of them. Yeah, okay, so I'll start with those. And just select them, right-click, and say Open With, and just bring them up. You can see I have all three of them open now. I could click and drag them over into Photoshop to open them as well. All right, so I'm using a MacBook Pro in Photoshop on Mac OS. Some of you are probably using PCs, running Photoshop on Windows, right? The only difference that makes, really, maybe a few sort of cosmetic things on the screen, but really just some of the shortcut keys that I talk about, right? So if I'm saying Command-C, Command-V to copy and paste, for Windows users, that means Control-C, Control-V, not Command, right? Make sense? Yeah. Okay. So I think we all know that. So when I say Command-A to select all, everything in the screen, right? And you see that the selection box is all around my screen now. That's Control-A for you if you're at a PC. So Command-A, Command-C, and then I'll come back in here and say Command-V and paste it in. There it is. Now, if I really think I need something bigger than this, I go back into Rhino, go back to my name views, click into that perspective, make sure it's all framed up correctly, re-export, capture to file, and then up the scale, right? So that suddenly I have more pixels. So do it. Okay. But this will work. I don't want to like beat everybody over the head with this perspective. This is one perspective of 3 plus a series of other drawings for me. So why not? So I'm going to go ahead and just place these. You can see that each time I copy and paste in, if you don't know this yet, I want to bring this to your attention. We have boxes over here on the right, and at the bottom, typically by default, we have layers. So each thing that we paste in here from a different file will be in its own layer, and then we can start to drag layers on or drag layers around independently, turn them on or off, or lock them independently. As we start to again think of this as really kind of like, anybody ever have to do like a physical collage where you had to cut things out and paste them together and layer things up and create texture? We're doing the digital version of that, if you want to think of it that way, right? So all of these layers become, here we go. I don't know why my mouse stopped working. Let me unplug it and plug it back in. Damn mouse. There we go. Okay, great. I mean, a good craftsman, everything just crappy tools or whatever. All right. Command-A, Command-C, select all, and then copy, and then Command-V to paste. Here's another one. All right, that'll work. Did I do this one already? I sure did. Did I do this one already? I sure haven't. I did this one just now. All right, so here, Command-A, Command-C, Command-V. All right. You can see that I have a variety of things here, and I can move them independently of each other. One of the things I quickly started to think about is how these might actually then share a common horizon and become a sort of, right on the same horizontal datum. What you can see is that I have more space here than I really want, right? So I'm going to have to fix that. And I'm thinking about how I then blend in between, certain lines going this way, lines going that way on the ground larger things. So how these layers play nice with each other is, again, another question you always have to sort of concern yourself with. But first and foremost, I'm just going to zoom in. Okay, I'm just using my pinch or my mouse wheel. Or here's the shortcut. Command 0 fits the screen. Command plus zooms in. Command minus zooms out. Okay. If you need a pan, like click and just drag the screen over so you can see to the right or the left. Hold down the space bar. Your cursor becomes a hand you can pan around. Right? Okay. So I'm going to zoom in here and just try to line these things up a little better. Click, click, click. I'm just using the arrow tool on my keyboard to bump that down so those pixels line up. Try to do the same thing over here if I can actually see. Here's what I can do. The order of the layers, right? Determine the order of the layers on my screen, right? Like what's on top of what's on bottom. So in this case, this is blocking so much of this. Maybe I actually drag this underneath this layer 2, underneath layer 1, so I can see what happens. Let's see, click and drag. All right, now I've changed that, and I'm just going to move this off to the screen here. Yeah, and you can see it doesn't quite line up. There we go, that's much better. Now I can drag this over. You can see I still have some goofiness here to reconcile. And of course I want to make sure that this is all on my screen at the same time. And again, you see the checkerboard. I'm dealing with a transparent background. So at this point is when I said, well, okay, everything below this datum, this horizon line is going to be black. So I'm going to make one more layer. I'm going to put it underneath everything else. And I'm just going to select this empty space here on layer 4. And in this case, I'll just use a paintbrush. So I use my tools over here on the left, paintbrush, change the type of brush it is, right? Again, I'm taking these things for granted, that your interface is exactly like mine. I have some options and parameters on the top, I have some tools on the left, and I have some properties boxes on the right. If you don't see it that way, you can go to, I believe it's Window, pull down, Workspace, and I like to use Essentials default because it has all that stuff on my screen at the same time, instead of trying to hide it in different places. I don't know why they hid it in later versions. Like, it's not progress at all. It's like the opposite. It's like regressing. I don't know. So if you go to Essentials default, then you'll see the same sort of things that I have. When I click any kind of tool that uses a brush, right, then I'll start to see brush parameters up here, the shape, the pressure, the size, and other parameters. So I can say, let's make it a nice solid brush. Let's up the size. And I can start to paint. In this case, I'm painting white. Oopsie. And you come to this palette, and I'll just switch this. Right now I have white on top of black. I'll just say, okay, let's make it black. And I'll just start filling that in, right? It only fills in the stuff that I have inside that box right here, right? Okay, great. So now I can start to see some things. Now I'm going to make another one, and I'm going to, again, put it over the white or the black box. No, actually, I'm going to move it down to the very bottom, I think. And I'm going to make the white background just so we can start to see a little better the geometry here. Let's see. Turn this to white. Let's shade that in, right? It's okay. I didn't realize we were running out of time. It's 11:15. We're at the end of class. Really quickly, I'll just show you some of the quick ways you can very quickly open up those silhouette files. Then we'll pick up where I left off on Wednesday, right? But don't let that get in the way if you want to start sooner rather than later to start composing these things, going back into Rhino, getting the assets that you need. So let's see, if I go to, let's see, where is it? Entourage, here we go. I gave you, here's some of the packs of people I gave you. I thought I had this pre-opened, I guess not. So now we have to wait for Illustrator to open, but we're really close. Let's pick somebody walking that doesn't look too out of place here. You know, there's somebody right there, just sort of, random person. Oh, I like that one actually. So I'm going to copy and paste. When I copy and paste, let's say a vector item from Illustrator into Photoshop, it's going to ask me, well, what do you want to paste that? So you want to paste it to pixels? Because Is a smart object, the path. I'm going to go ahead and pick smart object. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and hit done. And I'm going to go ahead and move this up so that it's at the top of my layers. And just try to quickly, again, zoom in here and move this out of the way. Okay, so you can see that in Illustrator I had black silhouette on a white field. In this case, I think I run a white silhouette on a black field. I can either solve that here in Photoshop, or I can go back to Illustrator and just quickly change that and say, okay, I want a white silhouette, copy and paste as a smart object. There it is. Now, when I actually move this down, you can see it, right? And here's what I'm talking about. We'll talk about this more when we really look at perspective, right? But if I have the rulers up here along the top and the left, I can click and drag and actually drag a horizontal guide, establish where I want eye level to be, and then I can simply start to place human figures all at the same eye level, right? Of course, I can change their opacity or whatever, just to, so they don't pop too much. And then what I can do is I can start to do this serially. So maybe I add a couple more people. Let me turn this one to white, copy, paste, smart object. Let's bring this thing down. Oh, maybe I didn't change it. I don't know, let's see. Copy, paste, smart object. Oh, sorry, it's way down here. I have to move it up in the hierarchy of layers here, right? So I put this one at eye level the same way, and if I transform it bigger, she's going to be closer. And if I transform smaller, she's just going to be further away, right? But eye level is always funny enough. People are around the same height, their eyes are going to be exactly around the same height. So keeping that in mind, right? Play around, break things, fail early, fail often is the key, right? You have a week, and if somebody's falling behind and you need a little more time, I'm always sympathetic to listen and help you out. Again, try it out. Come with maybe a couple of questions that, something didn't work on Wednesday. Okay? Or if we get through the rest of the demonstration on Wednesday, it's work time, and then I can float around and look over your shoulder if you have any questions or want some feedback. Okay? All right. Thanks for your patience and your time. I'll see you on Wednesday. I can't wait. Project 1 almost done. Yay.